Welcome to this Fireside Chat, which is about Black girls and juvenile justice. So if just to make sure you're in the right one, in the right chat. I'm Tiffany, and I'll let my co-presenters present themselves. We, I think, are probably all open to a very interactive chat when um, folks can drop stuff in the chat or raise hands, or we can have a discussion. We're here for an hour. My name is Tiffany Sizemore. I'm a full-time professor at Duquesne Law School. I operate a clinic that focuses on kids, a legal clinic that focuses on representing kids in delinquency matters and in school discipline and special education matters. It's called the Youth Advocacy Clinic for those of you who are local. All of our services are provided at no cost. This is I think, my 7th academic year. And we are, I started the clinic because I wanted to change the way kids are represented in Allegheny County. I thought I could do something unique, and we have. So my research partners in the clinic are Dr. Jeff Shook at Pitt School of Social Work and Dr. Tammy Hughes at Duquesne Law's School of Education. She's a school psychologist. So I think what we're going to kick it off with, first topic, is really just talking about, I'm going to first talk about sort of what the last year or so has brought for juvenile justice and education justice, a little bit for girls in Allegheny County. Dr. Sigmund, who's going to talk next, is going to talk about some of the data. And then Chief Bethel is going to talk about his program in Philly and some of the work of the task force that we served on together. So that's our rough agenda. Welcome to all of you who are just joining. We're having an informal fireside chat. I should have tried to find a fireside background. So let me just start by saying what we've seen, obviously, since the last summit. We entered into this brave new pandemic world. So what we've seen may not be representative of what we see next year. Just a little bit. So the first thing I had in my notes to talk about is, for those of you who are local, is obviously the closing of Schumann Center, which happened suddenly, I think 4 Fridays ago now. Schumann have been operating on a provisional license. So for those of you who don't know, and if I'm saying words that you don't know, please just drop it in the chat. Schumann is our local juvenile detention center, houses boys and girls pre-trial, mostly pre-trial. So it's like would be the equivalent of the county jail. So it's kids who are detained pre-trial. It's a short-term detention center. Over many years, the last 20 or 30 years, the population of Schumann has dropped dramatically, from a high of well over capacity in the 90s to, I think there were 21 kids at Schumann on the day that they lost their license. They have been operating on a provisional license for several years for a variety of different failures, according to the state, to come into compliance. About 4 Fridays ago, they had another inspection, and at the end of that, they lost their license. Which meant that at the moment of the inspection, from the moment of the license revocation, there could be no more new admits to Schumann, and they had until last week, or this week, last week, to get the rest of the kids, the 21 kids who were there, out. And so we no longer have a local juvenile detention center, which is, a double-edged sword because of how it happened. Not because, we shouldn't be seeking to have less kids in detention, but, or no kids in detention, but because when it happens with no warning, then now what is the current state of things is that kids who are detained pre-trial, boys and girls, are currently, for the very most part, being sent to an Adelphi facility in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. So that is the state of where we are. There is, to my knowledge, no plans to open another detention center in Allegheny County. Christy, the facility kids are being sent to is Adelphi Manor Care. But there are some kids who are post disposition at Schumann, meaning that they've already been adjudicated delinquent and they may be at Schumann for a variety of reasons. But that's a really small number. And some of those kids went to Adelphi Secure, which is a different program. And then they may have gone to kids who are post disposition, may have gone to other places as well. But our pretrial kids are currently going to Latrobe for their detention, awaiting any outcome of whether they're going to be released pending the outcome of their case. Kids get into detention in Allegheny County, it's a probation decision, so police cannot direct admit anybody into juvenile detention. If they would like to try to admit a kid to juvenile detention, then there's an on-call probation officer at all times who does a risk assessment instrument, and that is how the determination is made about whether to place a child into detention. So when someone else's turn comes up, I'll look at the numbers for this week. I didn't look at the report on Monday to see how many kids we have in secure detention, but I'll let you all know. So that has been like the big thing, and that's going to include boys and girls, right? So there's no, whatever. So that's been the latest thing that has affected our girls. Obviously, so there's, to my knowledge, in the last year, there have been no new community-based girls programs that have been started in Allegheny County. There is a new girls secure facility being built at Adelphi that is supposed to be ready in the spring of 2022. So we continue to lack high-end community-based treatment for girls. So I don't want to repeat myself a lot for people who already know this, but basically right now for boys in the county, there's a variety of options that exist. If you are somebody who maybe doesn't need to go to placement, but who can't just handle like a regular probation that's pretty mellow, if you need some sort of high-end community supervision, like a CISP, for those of you from Allegheny County who are familiar with CISP, Community Intensive Supervision Program, where the boys are with the program 6 to 7 days a week from after school until late at night. That type of program does not exist for girls. And so I think it will continue to drive up our girl placement numbers in ways that don't need to be if we had the right programming for girls, or if we had more programming for girls, let me say. And last year, educationally, obviously, most of our kids were out of school. We have data, the clinic collected some data over from both parents and students. Some of our Gwen's girls were researchers for that data, have been helping us collect data from students about what the last academic year was like for them. And we are in the process of crunching those numbers now, so look out for a report on that. But the long story short is Allegheny County has not been an exception from the rest of the country in terms of the massive education loss that happened last academic year. And the question really is about what band-aids or fixes can be made. As an education practitioner, I would say that there aren't any clear answers on that. Many school districts did offer what was called COVID compensatory education for kids with IEPs, so that they would have some dollars and some services for those kids. But for regular ed kids, we're just now getting back into schools, and many school districts are doing some initial testing to try to find out what the learning loss has been, and then what is going to happen next, I do not know. What are the fixes going to be? I do not know. So that's kind of where we are. educationally. And I will turn it over to Dr. Sigmund to talk about data.
Thank you. Yeah, so the data that I was going to share, which I will do that now because it's not a lot. I just put together one slide because I figured I was sort of interloping on you guys. Hold on, let me make sure I'm doing this the right way. Hold on, let me do this in a strange way. I don't know how to do this view screen thing. Oh, here, present. Can you guys see that?
Yes, that works.
Okay. So Sarah Goodkind, who's on here, I think, and she can speak to the data that she had collected from Allegheny County. She had some slide or some graphics in there with some national comparison stuff to the county. And I just sort of updated it because we have newer data now. So right before the pandemic for the 2019 calendar year, and this is sort of showing it as how many times more likely was it for Black girls to come into the system at different or proceed to different stages than it was for white girls or white boys. So the purpley lines are the white girls and the blue lines are the white boys. So just even coming into court, it's about Black girls were getting referred about 3 times as more often as the white girls, and a little bit more than 1 time. Oops, my line has skewed. The line at 1 here is the sort of when it's equal. And for detained being put in Schumann Center or the equivalent elsewhere around the country, nearly 4 times as much as white girls and just a little bit more than white boys. Ordered to probation 3 times more than white girls and actually a little bit less than white boys. Cases ordered to residential placement a little more than 3 times and a little bit less than the white boys, 3 times more than the white girls. And the waiver or juvenile court transferring the case to criminal court, just a little more than double the number for white girls or the rate for white girls, and much less than the rate for white boys. I didn't even bother to put on the comparisons for the Black boys because they get slammed. So they're much worse in most things in these very, very aggregate data. But the difference for the girls is quite noticeable and quite unnecessary, frankly. The numbers of girls overall coming into the system is relatively small. And I know I've had conversations over the years with Kim Booth about things like the CISP program, where it was designed to be based in neighborhoods. So it's not a citywide thing. There's certain neighborhoods that have CISP locations. And because there's too few girls in any given neighborhood that would be kind of eligible, there's not enough girls to run a program. So in an odd way, there's too many girls, but there's also not enough girls compared to the numbers of boys that are in the system. It's difficult to run a good program for just a couple of girls. And in Pennsylvania and in many other states, that ends up with, oh yes, girls get committed more often because there wasn't that community-based option. So they're in a facility, and often that facility is far away for the same reasons, that in order to get enough girls together to run a facility of a size that you're getting some economies of scale, they tend to be sort of farther away. So really getting the community-based options available that are not residential really strikes me as the way to go. And when there are needs for more intensive behavioral health, mental health services, interestingly, oddly, the pandemic has showed us that a lot of that can work remotely. So maybe you don't need all the girls to be sitting in a room together. They can be sitting in a Zoom together from wherever across the country and still getting those services from a clinician who may not be anywhere nearby. So that's something where I think the pandemic has maybe helped a little bit, just because people are more open to this kind of thing where they wouldn't have been before. And I think, I mean, we do a lot of work all around the whole country, and what we, I've been sort of griping to people in Pennsylvania is that Pennsylvania for a long, long time really was kind of advanced compared to other states, in that we had this vast network of private providers. Those private providers provided lots of services residentially. And that, during the 90s, that was a great thing, because that meant our kids were not in harsh state training schools. But the rest of the country changed away from residential placement, and Pennsylvania seems still very, very dependent on residential placement. I happen to participate in the state Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Committee's subcommittee on diversion. And, I have been saying this till I'm blue in the face. You need to help the providers get away from having to have a bed. It's hard to make kids come to services, though. So you maybe need to engage youth and families much differently in designing those services. They're not a captive population when they're going home every day and in their own communities. It has to be something that they realize the benefits of it too. But the diversion subcommittee, I will say, is the state is evidently trying to put together some funding to, I don't think a lot of money, and I have no idea how much, but to encourage diversion. They were sort of paying attention to the things that came out of the task force recommendations. I have been encouraging, let's be willing to fund some diversion opportunities, strategies, practices that aren't necessarily a program, and let's be willing to try things where there's diversion with little or no strings attached. So, just it's considered by the Federal Department of Justice a promising practice to have a good impact on future delinquency, to keep kids out of the juvenile justice system. So let's do what works. Let's keep kids out of the system as much as we can. And I'll let Kevin talk, because that's all about what he's been doing.
Well, Dr. I appreciate that. And I do have, just to kind of really give a good overview of our program and the work we're doing and how it kind of brings the work that Tiffany has talked about and Dr. Sigmund has talked about. I will share my screen. Let me set it up first. And give me 1 second here. Can you see that? Okay, well, great. So again, I appreciate, being on with my esteemed panelists, and we've worked together in my work as I've gravitated into this space. Let me begin by introducing myself. My name is Kevin Bethel. I'm a retired deputy commissioner from the Philadelphia Police Department. I retired in 2016. For 3 years, I had a fellowship with Stoneleigh Foundation, where I was traveling around the country talking about diversion, in particular school to prison pipeline, and working with law enforcement to bring about change. Started a small nonprofit around the Juvenile Justice Institute, Law Enforcement Juvenile Justice Institute, to really raise awareness around this issue and the role law enforcement plays in bringing our kids into the system. And somehow through a crossing of paths, Superintendent Height here at the Philadelphia School District asked me to come in and kind of re-envision and reimagine the work of our school safety team in the Philadelphia School District. So I arrived here in 2019, and the COVID hit, and I've been, this is my first full year really engaging with the kids starting in September. So I talk about that in 2000, prior to me starting in this work and leaving the police department in 2010, 10 or 11, I was asked to be a part of a national program around law enforcement and juvenile justice, and where law enforcement could have a greater role in addressing the issues of young people. We all know that, almost, I think it's over 85% of the kids who come into the criminal justice system come into law enforcement. So we can talk about overrepresentation of young ladies, young men, kids of color, but if we're not going to work upstream with law enforcement, then no matter what, I'm still going to give you 100 Black girls or 100 Black boys of color or 100 white boys, whatever we're talking about, we have to change. And so I was involved in a program, and we really started to hear about trauma-informed care, adolescent development, all of these trainings I was involved in, and this started to become more aware, because the reality is I'm a cop for almost 25 years, and really seasoned in. I came from the community, raised by a single mother with 4 boys, and if I got out and pulled it up by your bootstrap, why can't these kids get out? And so oftentimes, you lose that empathy that we often, and especially in policing. And so part of it was a re-engagement of that. And so I would share with the audience that one day I woke up, I have all this information. And for those of you who may have followed Judge Steve Teskey's work out of Clayton County, Georgia, I sat with this Southern judge, and he started nudging me about, well, now that you got all this knowledge, what are you going to do? And so I came back, and finally I said, you know what, he said, take a look at Philadelphia, and what are you doing with your kids in schools? At the time, I ran operations for the entire city of Philadelphia and oversaw the school safety office as part of my charge, and had a commander working here for me. But I didn't pay much attention to the schools. We were busy fighting crime and fighting violence. But I did. And so as Dr. Sickman said, I came back and I looked at the data, and I looked down on a sheet of paper, and I'm locking up 1,600 kids a year. The majority of those are kids of color. And ladies and gentlemen, the stuff I was locking for, I said I was disappointed in myself that I was arresting kids for disorderly conduct for fighting in school. Young girls, predominantly young African-American girls coming to school with mace, even though we know that's a protective device. Young kids are being bullied who are coming to school with scissors or a cutting instrument. We were locking up kids who were coming to school with box cutters, and they worked after school. And so I would embark on a process. I went to my commissioner at the time, Commissioner Ramsey, and said, I can't do it anymore. Born and raised in the city, went through the public school system, never imagined I would be arresting children for this. And I'll tell folks, I won't do it today, but I show a video of a young child being arrested, and that young child goes through the arrest process for coming into a school with scissors. At the end of that process, I talked with the audience about that video and watching this 11-year-old child being arrested. You can see the pictures that are depicted on the screen. At the end, we talk about it, but I share with the audience that was my daughter, that the child depicted in that video would walk through the process because I took my daughter out. She loves to act, and we went through this act of going through the arrest process. But halfway through, I thought I was traumatizing my daughter just before getting through the act. But more importantly, it made me recognize that it's okay when it's somebody else's child. But if it was yours, and I sat there and thought to myself, this is my daughter, I'd burn the building down. That my daughter's getting arrested for coming to school with a pair of scissors, and this is what we would do to her: hold her in a cell block for 6 hours, give her a criminal record, and put her on a trajectory that ultimately could destroy her life, without ever even asking questions: does she have food at home, or services at home, or does she need anything? And so this would I'll share with you that transformation for me. So I would start the school diversion program. And just to really set it up, we had very much a zero tolerance policy. We have school security officers, so we have metal detectors at all of our high schools. We have about 320 school safety officers. That's down now, but we have that. We had, at the time, a high level of suspensions. That's come down significantly. But we were arresting, as I indicated, 1,600 children a year in our system. And I would challenge the system when there was a pushback, and I said, well, if this was working, then every year it should go down, right, Doc? I mean, if the system's working, then I should have at least 1,599 the next year, and maybe one below that. But if we're averaging 1,600 kids a year, then clearly they weren't learning by the example, because I was arresting them, that somehow the other kids learned by the example of the others. That just was not happening. And so we would say that's just not acceptable. Just very quickly, I mean, we have a large school district, 8th largest in the nation, 326 schools, and it's actually more than that now, but in a large student base. I don't say that out of like bragging, but I also say that if a district of our size can embark on this process, then the only ones I'm going to fight with is the other 8, the 7 in front of me. But everyone should be able to do this process. I will really quickly tell you there's a distinction in our process, which is different than maybe some of your jurisdictions. We have 320 school safety officers in our school, which I oversee now. They do not carry firearms. They do not carry weapons. So they don't carry mace or batons. They have handcuffs in their mouth. And we control all the activity happening in the school. And we contact the police department, who have school safety officers who work outside of the school setting, along our pathways and corridors, et cetera, to come in if we had to make an arrest. So we own those 1,600 arrests because every time we called the police department, they would come in and make those arrests. And so part of my transformation was I went down this path of being more trauma informed, and I tell people, and some of you may have heard me say this before, I'm not an expert. I'm someone who's been in law enforcement for 35 years. And so I respect those who are my panelists or peers who are on the panel today and others. This is their expertise. I just wanted to keep it simple. And I followed the KISS method, keep it simple, stupid. And so I remember sitting with a doctor trying to figure out, well, what is this trauma informed? I'm trying to figure out the lobe and all that. He said, Kev, let's just do this. The wrong question is to ask you, what did you do? The right question is, what happened to you? And sometimes it may be a simple statement, but I never looked at it from that point. That a young child that I put my hand on her and she goes ballistic, not understanding that, that's how her sexual predator touched her and that was her trigger. Well, I never learned that. No one ever taught me that children had triggers and things of that nature. And so part of that is really helping us as an organization understand that. Understanding and really coming back to the root of, yes, I tell people I say about pulling up my bootstraps. I thought I was poor until I came in the police department. And when I went through some of these doors, I at that point realized I was not as poor as I thought I was. I would see true poverty as a police officer when I would go into doors and I would say, oh my goodness, and families are trying to make it, but still struggling and can barely have anything to eat. And so part of what we understood in developing our program, that many of the stuff and the activity that manifests in school is rooted in all the things that you see on the screen. Sexual abuse, when we have our young girls in the programming and we bring them in for marijuana and we see it as a masking and self-medicating. And when you get them in a group, you find out that 50% of them have been experiencing sexual abuse in their life. The bullying, the kids we were locked up for coming to school with a knife was the same kid who was getting bullied all the way home from school. And he was just carrying something to protect himself. And our way of dealing with him was that to arrest him because he came through our metal detector. And so really challenging ourselves to understand what childhood trauma was and how our role, not just saying not arrest the kids, but what does it do when I even arrest them and cuff them and take them to the building and put them in a cell block? For that would be a question for us to saying we're starting the trauma process and doing that. And so we would embark on a collaboration. And I purposely put the police department in the center of it and I don't do that out of arrogance. I just deal it out of reality. The day I talked to my commissioner and said that I would not be arresting kids for these offenses anymore, the question I needed from him was it okay, yes or no? When he said yes, then I took all the authority as me as a law enforcement entity to say, I don't have to arrest these children. And so no one can make me arrest anybody. And so we would recharge ourselves as a department and say, we're not going to arrest it. But we would also know that we needed a partnership. And so those folks around the circle are folks that we aligned our work with to get a partnership. We had a juvenile detention alternative initiative, so I could go there to the task force to ask for the supports I need. Drexel University is our research partner and been our partner who capture all of our information. Our community providers, the public defender. It was important because we were talking about kids and I'm going to let a kid go, but I'm not interviewing them. And so what does that happen when I say I want to go back and arrest him? Well, wait a minute, he's not represented, the defender would say. So we would say, okay, well, we're not going to go back and arrest the child because if we gave him that pass, it was unfair because he was not represented at the beginning of the process. That was a very thoughtful conversation and it would change how we would develop our program so we would not rearrest. And so family court, but I left the highlight of DHS, Department of Human Services. For them, they would be the key partner for us because we would ask them that I want to divert kids pre-arrest before we put them in the system at the school, but I need programs to get them supports. And they stepped up and said, well, listen, where you been? We've been looking for working with the police department for years and no one wanted to cross over with us. And so they would set up so I could have 6 community-based programs to send our children through without putting them into the system, without giving them a criminal record, without doing anything but helping them and supporting not just the child, but the family as well. And so our diversion process was very simple. That was it, ladies and gentlemen. That was how we did it. School call, we stop a kid, we make an arrest. We would build that out by adding additional offenses. We said, well, fighting. So when you talked about our young girls, majority of our young ladies were getting arrested for disorderly conduct. That's out. We're not going to arrest kids for disorderly conduct. Majority of our kids were coming in for weapons, particularly our Black girls with mace. We're not going to arrest for those offenses anymore. And we became very targeted. And marijuana, many of our kids, both particularly our African-American kids, were coming in with marijuana, a large percentage of our girls. And so we could be very targeted around the disproportionality. Now we have a large system, 71% of our school district is African-American Latino. And so we had a lot of work to do to make sure that we could identify those offenses. Serious offenses, we still don't divert them. So, the aggravated assaults and those robberies, we don't, but that's a small representation of our numbers. 95% of our kids were doing low-level minor offenses. So we do the summary misdemeanors. We created a system where it would be unbiased. So the officers in the field have to call into our intake center, manned by 2 Philadelphia police officers who are now in my office. I got them to move in with me. And so they can call into the system, and all we ask is the kid eligible. And if they have not been diverted before, but even that, we're waiving that, and then we divert them. We don't care about, there's people don't like them, their school grades, there's a kid that gives it a problem. I don't want to hear none of that. All I want to hear is this the offense. And now our school safety officers, because we have the Philadelphia Police Department here in our office now, they are diverting them without even asking the police department to come to the schools. And that is working exceedingly well. And if they have a prior offense, we've now negotiated that. And so we still divert with prior offenses, depending on what it is. And so we really have expanded our work into all of the discretionary. So if you look at the Safe School Act, where it says discretionary offenses, we now require that none of those offenses, we call the police officer, police department. We use our diversion model to deal with all of them. And so we've expanded our model. One of the things I want to quickly say is that we do go to DHS, to the homes to visit, to make sure the students, check on the family, to see what the needs of the family are. Some of the families have no food, no lights, none of that. They have other siblings that need support. And so when we refer them to the community provider, it is really a family-based program, and that begins the diversion process. But one of the things I want to make key, we do not go back and make an arrest. And so just real quickly, I want to make sure I save time for questions and the like, but one of the things we do, or the components of our program, is really these key areas of all of our 6 programs, depending on the needs of the child, is where they are. We have a large percentage of our kids are single parent homes, so mom is struggling with that son. And so getting him or her in the program, the families meet together with the providers. Each of the kid gets a caseworker. All of our programs have support services available. They get a caseworker, there's social workers, there's psychologists, and 2 of our programs are able to do drug and alcohol because many of our kids have some addiction issues with marijuana, and they're helping to treat them in that regard. But it's really, we recognize that we can't take many of our kids out of the social ills that they live in, but if we can help them with the tools to be able to manage in that space, how to manage their anger, how to work in that space, and knowing that they have some place to go. In most cases, these are the first time kids had somebody to love them and put their hands on them and praise them for who they are. They do a lot of trips or field trips to get the kids out of the community so they can see other things. And so what does it look like when you change policy? We went from a system in 2013 that was arresting almost 1,600 kids to our last full school year, we had 251. And we dropped 84% in our school-based arrests since we started the program. And with our expansion, we hope to cut that 251 in half and only take the most serious offenses that require police engagement to move our kids through. And some people say, well, you're doing this as a diversion, everybody get a second chance. Our offenses have gone down as well. So we're not seeing an increase like kids say, I want one of those. That's just not happened. So the argument that, well, you're going to have more action because of kids, we're not seeing that in our system. And one of the things, so just really quickly, where we made our cuts at, we stopped arresting kids for coming to school with a weapon unless he's a gun. Marijuana, we don't arrest for at all anymore. It's a ticket in the city of Philadelphia, but we divert those kids. Disorderly conduct, we don't arrest any of those kids for disorderly conduct. And at the end, you'll see assaults on police officers. We call ourselves police, but we're a security force at the time. But we don't allow our officers into classroom for code of conduct issues. and they're required to stay away from any of the code of conduct issues, stay in your lane, and let the school system do what it's supposed to do. When we found ourselves engaged in that process, it causes problems. Just real quickly, here's a 1-year recidivism rate for our kids coming out. So the red represents our control group. That's the group in 2013 that were arrested for the same offenses for our diverted group. And as you can see, almost twice, the recidivism rate, for kids who were arrested, and 14%. And in our case, 86% of our kids, as you see, remain arrest-free. And so as just a real final conclusion, part of our work here now as a school safety is really training my men and women to be better, trauma, implicit bias, and all of the tools they need to be effective, creating restorative circles. We trained our office on restorative circles. We're doing mentoring in our schools as part of our charge now, and we continue to expand that work. We've created youth courts, so we have a referral so we can refer instead, not just sending kids to our diversion program, which could be a 3 to 6 month or 9 month, or 6 month program. We now created youth courts, and a youth court also serves as my advisory panel. So they also advise me on my policies and procedures and help with that work. And then, as I shared before, we've expanded our diversion work to really capture as many kids as we can possible. And I can tell you, the Philadelphia Police Department and our guys have been absolutely amazing. To this year alone, they don't want to arrest nobody. They try to divert things that we don't even have in our MOU. They're like, listen, if you want to do something different with them, we don't want to arrest them, and I couldn't be more proud of them. So I'll end with a quote that came from Malik. He was one of the kids early in our program. He was almost getting ready to graduate, and in the past we'd arrested him and put him in custody. He was, I think he got caught with a weapon, a knife in his bag or something like that. But he got it. He said, I didn't want to get put away. You can't come back from that. If you got a record and people look at you differently, the police school diversion program, the counselors I had were awesome. They wanted to see us succeed. Now, Malik would want to go into college. He was not able to go into college, but he's working 2 jobs. He's doing phenomenally well, ladies and gentlemen. We gave him the gift card that, 65% of our nation do not have college degrees. And so the big part of him was just really giving him an opportunity to strive and do what he's doing. And he's doing extremely well. And he represents what we're trying to do with our program. And so I had my screen wide open, so I'm not sure if any comments came in, but I'll stop there. And Tiffany, and I don't know if we're gonna, is it a round robin with the, I know you said you want to mention about the task force. Are you want to talk about that as well, or open it?
Well, I don't want to say a lot except for 2 things. One is that we tried as hard as we could to get as much of Chief Bethel's school diversion program enshrined into the task force recommendations, and hopefully they will be adopted by the legislature, because the data speaks for itself. I mean, this is something I talk about all the time, right? When we have the evidence in front of us of what happens when we divert kids, right? When we stop arresting kids, of a tool that has worked to effectively make a huge dent in the school to prison pipeline. So we have the data. Why would we not make this the law of the land, right? There's no reason we shouldn't. And so to that end, the part of the task force where we come up with the recommendations is complete, and the report is complete. And so what we need from the community is, once the legislature begins to take up these reforms and codify them, make them law in Pennsylvania, you should watch the task force website. You should watch out for us task force members, Chief Bethel, myself, Judge Clark's on the task force from Allegheny County, Megan Black, Russ Carlino. You can ask any of us about what's going on with the work of the task force, but we need the community to speak up and to contact their legislatures and state reps and state senators and ask them to support these reforms when they are presented to the legislature. There may be opportunities for testimony. There may be opportunities for other types of campaigns, more formal campaigns to legislators, but that's what we need. We need you all to say, I saw the data, right? I saw what happens with the Philadelphia police school diversion program, and I saw all of those numbers going down, right? And I need the same thing to happen everywhere across the state. So I don't know, Kevin, if you have anything else to say about the task force, but It was a long process, and yeah.
I do. I think, well, first, for the audience, I mean, I didn't meet, I think I had contact with Tiffany prior, but she was absolutely a beast in that space. If you want to see one of the greatest advocates for young people, I mean, Tiffany really, really leaned into, we all had our areas of responsibility, but her voice in that space really had an imprint on how the task force report came out. And so, she was the expert. I just came in, but I can tell the audience and folks here, one of the most frustrating things to walk in and particularly coming from a law enforcement space, but now in a different vision of my work, but to find that the majority of the kids in placement were for misdemeanors, first time offenses. That was absolutely shocking to me. First, the children who were arrested for the first time were in placement for misdemeanor offenses. So these are nonviolent offenses that were packing our spaces, and I struggle with that. And so I really would encourage individuals not just, when you read the report. I mean, one, I think that the purpose was to really take a look at the system and how we could reduce placement, and also working up front end to minimize the number of kids coming into the system. And it really has a really robust data that really gives you the why. So when you look at when we made our recommendation around the school-based diversion, well, some people say, well, it's so simplistic, right? Disorderly conduct, tobacco, possession of small marijuana, drug paraphernalia. But if you look at the data across the 78% of the kids being arrested were for those offenses. It was shocking to me, and we were participating in that before, so I can't say, particularly around disorderly conduct, that we spend most of our time chasing our kids in our schools and arresting them for fighting in school and coming with low levels of marijuana or tobacco. I mean, that doesn't make any sense, and there's no way anyone can tell me that the juvenile justice system was built to deal with that. And so I think there is really, but I think Tiffany hit on, the report was completed. But if the community doesn't make noise and really reach out to their legislative bodies and say, well, we have this report, what are you going to do about it? I mean, the roadmap is there. There's been other reports that have been done and went onto the shelf. It was our hope coming out of this task force that I think was in June when it was released, that we would have some kind of motivation, some movement. And at this point, it's really sitting there. And maybe there's something happening behind the scenes that I'm not aware of legislatively.
I would say guaranteed there are legislators right now that are drafting, if not whole bills, at least parts of things, right? And some of them are drafting things that do not go in line with what the task force has recommended, and others are, trying to put the task force report basically into legislation. But if they, if legislators think that people are opposed to the idea of diverting youth, if legislators think that the only solution is what some prosecutors around the state claim, that everyone needs to be locked up, and oh my God, are we just going to do nothing? Frankly, the research shows that doing nothing is often better than what we choose to do. So yes, I'm okay with doing nothing some of the time. But yes, those things are happening right now. So, pay attention. For those of you that, maybe haven't been paying attention to that type of thing yet, pay attention and then vote. Oh my Lord, Tiffany, you're on the ballot in November. People need to vote, and then pay attention to how your reps deal with whatever the votes are that come up for whatever legislative proposals are put on the table, and then vote accordingly down the road.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think exactly what Dr. Sickman said about, people say, do you want to do nothing? And the truth is, for some of these low level nonsense stuff, offenses, yes, doing nothing is actually the most therapeutic thing that you can do, right? And putting a kid into the system who doesn't need to be there is actually harmful and increases their chances of having more contacts with the system. And so, it's really a matter of looking at data, interacting with stakeholders, and understanding what's going on. And we really just need people to stay engaged with this task force, follow-up, legislative follow-up, so that it doesn't end up on the shelf. And so I can't stress that enough.
And I just want to, I don't know, throw this out because I'm curious what people beyond just the Black Girls Equity Alliance Diversion Committee, you know, who's had conversations. I mean, to me, the very first thought of diversion actually comes with whoever is witness to a law violation or maybe a victim, and their choice to call police. So in the instance of what you've done, Kevin, in Philadelphia, that calling the police was happening by the schools. As Mr. Harris, you know, has talked about over and over again, the schools don't have to do that. They have that choice too, to behave differently. But even victims just in the community, citizens in the community, do have choices about how to respond to things. And in the Black Girls Equity Alliance, their diversion group, there's been discussions about trying to kind of make more robust the 211 instead of 911. Call for social services if there are mental health crisis or other things going on, so that, you know, law enforcement comes to the scene, and law enforcement, their main tool has been arrest. And they haven't had the, you know, the transformation with Kevin Bethel, so they're gonna make arrests when maybe having a mental health professional or other folks responding, and if the 211 could be somehow made more robust so that wouldn't overwhelm them, that is an option that we've been talking about. And I'm curious what people think about that.
And I think what you say is critical, because even we had looked at our threats. So we have, you know, almost about 150 kids that we were engaged in a year. I mean, some being arrested, some not being arrested for threats in school. 10-year-old child, someone blew up the school. And so to address that, we created a threat assessment team. And so now, in lieu of that, we respond to the scene. We engage the counselors, the social workers, and those folks who are in the school building who work with the youth. You know, see if the child has an IEP. You know, go through our matrix of risk, and then determine what's the best, you know, recourse for that child. And the first three are, you know, really not about law enforcement engagement. Is turn them back into the school to work with them. You know, is there another level? Our diversion, it becomes into that third tier. And only when we see, can this 10-year-old child actually have a gun? He doesn't, or she doesn't. I mean, it's a transient threat. We treat it as that. If there's mental health services that are necessary, we're able to engage that. But it gives us the ability, as you described, to really slow things down and really have a more thoughtful response than the call the police, come make the arrest, and then I find out the kid's been in, you know, has all kinds of issues, underlying medical issues and mental health issues that no one ever even asked a question about. And so I think that all of that work is critical, and we really are trying to lean into be more thoughtful and very more deliberate in how we go about, you know, addressing our young people.
Does anybody have questions or comments from the audience? You can drop them in the chat, or you can just come off mute and ask.
I think you can unmute and put your screen on if you want and join in.
We can't see my view doesn't allow me to see all of your boxes. So if you have something to say, just unmute and say it, or drop it in the chat.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Hi, I'm James Harris. I'm the superintendent of the Woodland Hills School District. And Mr. Bethel, I met you a while back at a meeting, but as you can tell, I'm from Philadelphia because I have all my Philadelphia.
So I'm talking about you're a good man, Harris. You're a good man. You're a good man.
That is actually ridiculous.
I got the Christmas trinkets. I got
all that swag in enemy territory.
Yeah. See, I got all my Eagle stuff back here, but I can tell you, I worked in Philly schools. I came from, no, go Steelers, please. Philadelphia has a different perspective when it comes to dealing with students. Totally different. When I left Philly and I came here, I was shocked at the attitude. It was an us versus them, you know, relationship with schools and students. So immediately I went to stop that and offer alternative approaches. And I wasn't the most popular person because the belief is that the police will put the fear of goodness in kids. It's our job as educators to enhance the relationship with the students and the staff and the community and make them whatever they want to be. It seemed to always be in conflict. So I got a lot of threatening letters and calls and text messages and people showing up at board meetings because I said, stop calling the police on students. We can handle it. And we have. And we use the diversion process. We use the restorative justice with James Ugly at Pitt. And we do all these things to help support students. So if you're still, and fine, if a child brings a gun to school, that's a totally different conversation. But a fight, a 10-year-old girl rolling her eyes at someone or throwing a pencil. I had a principal 4 years ago, call the police on a 10-year-old girl, young lady, because she threw a marker at her teacher who said something that she didn't like. The police came in and said, well, was it a permanent marker or dry erase? And they said, if it's permanent, maybe. Dry erase, leave us alone. And they said, this is for the principal. And they walked out of the building. And they said, stop calling us for this nonsense. So we have that relationship with them. And it's great.
Wow.
4 years later, I've been here 4 years now. We don't even think about calling the police anymore. It was a mindset change that had to occur over a number of years. And it's managed day by day, hour by hour, day by day. And as we build that new history, it's just a different experience here. So we created a different culture, but it took time. Now we don't even think about calling the police. This is not how it's done anymore, but that's what it's going to take. And I didn't just kick the police out of schools. We made the environment healthier for students and staff. So the police said, why are we even here? And they wanted to leave because they were bored. So once you get to that point, then you can slowly phase out the police and put other services and supports in place. We have mental health providers, behavioral interventionists, counselors, just people who live in the community who are teachers and staff who can talk to the kids. So when there is an issue, they come to us before it blows up. So that's how this can all be solved. It's not kick the police out and do whatever. I always say I'm a former military policeman. I was never trained to patrol the hallways of a high school, right? I wasn't, but I understand kids. I understand that they need second, third, fourth, fifth chances sometimes. And there's teachable moments. When a middle school kid says, I don't know why he did it, he really means he don't know why he did it because their brain is just not functioning yet all the way. So we have to realize that they're children and children make mistakes. I have a lot of guy friends. They make mistakes too. But we have to realize that they're children and these are teachable moments and we are teachers and educators, not parole officers, or we're not there to direct them into the courts. I'm going to court next month to make sure 3 kids stay out of trouble because I have a relationship with the judge and I will go there on their behalf and vouch for them. And we will put things in place to support them. That's how it has to be done. Legislator-wise, there's plenty of people in my community who want to lock every kid up when they can. They do because they think that's the way. It's the stick, not the carrot. So for us, that's how we did it here. It's day by day, creating that new normal for us.
Exactly.
And outside of the Eagles never winning a game that the Steelers lose, and although the Eagles record versus the Steelers, we're on the win side. May have the 6 rings, 7 rings.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm so glad you chimed in. But I think, in terms of folks around the country that are looking to reform juvenile justice, often, reforming probation, the catchphrase that I hear so often that resonates with a lot of people that even are kind of, had been in those kind of punitive roles or whatever, that kids need a coach more than they need a referee. They need someone to coach them into proper good behavior, not just throw a flag every time they screw up. And they're not going to be perfect, even, when they're in the system and they're trying to change, they're not going to be perfect at it. So let's give them credit for the improvements they make, rather than flagging them for every little thing they didn't get done perfectly.
And it really at our levels here that we work with, we reward the good behavior. We're so often
Get more of it that way.
Right. We're so often so fast to punish the group for the misdeeds of a few by not giving them a pep rally, not giving them a DJ and a ice cream party or something on Friday, celebrating the wins that they have. And the students say, hey, we know that kids do dumb things sometimes, but we all shouldn't be punished for it. So if you lead by rewarding, you'll get more people on board, and they will try to get that reward instead of trying to avoid the punishment. Because they'll say, I can do detention. That's no big deal. I'll do 3 days home suspension, no big deal. But if they're getting a reward like a pizza party on Fridays for hitting their attendance percentage number, or just no fights that week, just celebrate the little wins, and then you'll have more and more things to celebrate. In the end, you can't remember when that negative behavior used to occur. It becomes not the normal. Years ago, we had tons of fights in our schools. Now it's weird to have a fight. And for kids to run to it, now they go, hey, we don't do that here. You need to get that into the new narrative, not punishing, because they can do the punishment. They want the reward. So.
I was talking earlier today. Oh, sorry. I was talking earlier today with a bunch of judges from Wisconsin, and one of them in the chat said, well, yeah, but how do you change the system to do that? And I think from hearing you talk at other times, it's a little bit like how you're trying to get the kids to change. You reward the positive behavior, the things that you're doing in that direction, and eventually it will catch on and be the new normal. Kevin,
and
sorry.
It's one interaction at a time. You do it by one interaction at a time. You deal this situation to the next one, and then you have a trend. And that's how it works.
Superintendent Harris, man, you got to go on the road together. I mean, because sometimes it's a challenge lining things up, but I just think you raised some very good points. I think the long game, I think you don't change culture overnight. It requires a sustainable. Some people think they can check the box. I mean, the ARC always wants to go back, right? And it's hard to get folks, but to your point, 6 years removed from our diversion program, all the school, that's all they know now. The folks, right. the school office, like, oh, we divert. That's not a diversion. They don't even want to touch the kid, locking up a kid. Well, wait a minute, that can't be diverted. Stuff that's not even in our MOU. And I think your rewards is well taken. I learned that from Professor Dr. Goldstein. And so we, even in our mentoring program, we reward the kids with a gift card to complete the program. And man, they're in there every week because they want that gift card. And we're doing some work with kids who are transitioning back from placement. And we're doing mentorship with kids who are coming back into some of our neighborhood schools where it's a large percentage of them. And so we're working with them, sitting down with them, working with our transition team, mentoring them. And guess what? At the end, if they stay focused, they get a gift card. And man, they will, as you know, they will work like a bear for my $25 gift card. But the reward we find is really, really an advantage for us.
Yeah, and the students, we have to put people in front of students who care about students. The kids know who cares about them or not.
That's exactly right.
And they'll vie for that attention. And the kids want any type of attention, negative or positive. And they want the positive, but they'll settle for the negative. So you have to put people in front of them where the kids run to and say, hey, let me show you my grades. Let me show you what I'm doing. Let me share this with you. That's when you know you've made it. When the kids are hiding from people, not wanting to talk to them, knowing these individuals that we put in front of them to educate them don't like them, no student is going to learn from someone that they know doesn't like them. It just doesn't work. So
I know we're at 2:40.
It's just so simple, really. It's simple. You got to like the kids, and you got to realize that they're children. No matter how tall or old they look, they're still children. So treat them like that.
I recruited 20 people. I walk in the room. I said, do you like kids? Before I even asked you, do you want this job with school said, do you like kids? You'd be surprised.
Yeah, no.
So I know we had 245 our number.
Well,
we're past 245.
I mean, that is actually kind of interesting because I can't tell you the number of people in a juvenile justice circle that I talk to that are like, oh, I'll take the boys, but the girls, oh, they drive you crazy. And it's like, well, but so then are you just doing them a disservice because as you say, Mr. Harris, they can tell, they can tell what your attitude is. So if you don't want to work with girls, don't work with girls.
So I think we're at time.
We're probably over, but
we're a couple minutes over, but so, and I don't know what else is on the agenda for today. I don't want us to run into another session. But all the presenters, our bios are on the app. If you want to get in touch, and thank you so much for coming and hanging out with us, man. It's really been awesome.
Thank you, everyone.
Pittsburgh needs a quarterback.
This was great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm ejecting you from this.
Pittsburgh needs a quarterback that can run.
Not at all.
All I'm saying.
And you guys should present together. And let me just encourage our organization, Mr. Harris. You were a plenary speaker once. I know, Kevin, you've presented lots of times, but they're trying to do the Juvenile Justice Conference back in Pittsburgh in March of 2022, and the session proposal window is open now. On paper, it says to the end of September, which is like today or tomorrow or something. No, next week. But I think they're going to extend it to like mid-October. So maybe put something in.
Right. All right.
I'd love to see it.
All right. Have a good day, everyone.
Everybody.
Right.
Bye-bye now.